I almost didn't open the gift. That's how insignificant it looked. It was my 26th birthday, and I was sitting at the edge of my childhood bedroom, the same one I'd moved back into after my ex left me, and my startup collapsed within the same miserable month. There were no balloons.
No cake.
Just my mom pretending everything was fine, and my older cousin Melissa loudly reminding everyone how she'd just bought her second house. And then there was Aunt Farah. Quiet, observing, smiling in that knowing way she always did. She handed me a tiny velvet pouch. That's all. Melissa laughed. Careful, it might be another life lesson. I smiled politely. I'd learned to smile politely at everything. Inside the pouch was a small silver keychain.
Cheap.
Lightweight. Probably from a souvenir rack. It had a little engraving. Melissa snorted. How symbolic. I swallowed my pride and hugged Aunt Farah. Thank you. I love it. And I meant it, because it was the only gift that didn't feel like pity. For context, my family runs on a ranking system. Top tier, Melissa. Middle tier, anyone with stable employment. Bottom tier, me. I wasn't always the bottom tier. At 23, I'd launched a tech startup that actually showed promise. I was interviewed by local media. Investors were interested. For a brief, shining moment, I was the future success story. Until my co-founder drained company funds and disappeared. Legal battles swallowed what little savings I had. My boyfriend left, saying he didn't sign up for rebuilding from zero. So I moved back home. In our family, failure isn't temporary. It's branding. Melissa made sure of that. Some people peak early, she'd say sweetly at dinner. My parents didn't defend me. They were embarrassed. Except Aunt Farah. She never pitied me. She asked questions. She listened. She also never interfered. At least, that's what I thought. 2 weeks after my birthday, Aunt Farah asked me to have coffee with her. I almost canceled. I was applying to entry-level jobs despite having once negotiated six-figure deals. But she insisted. We met at a small cafe downtown. She placed the keychain on the table between us. Did you notice anything unusual about it? She asked. I blinked. It says home. She tilted her head. And I turned it over. There was a tiny engraved number I hadn't seen before. Unit 17B. I frowned. Is this the hotel? She smiled.
No.
Then she slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents. Official ones. Property transfer papers. My name printed clearly. Address. A luxury high-rise apartment downtown. Market value. $398,000. My brain refused to compute. I don't understand, I whispered. That, she said gently, is your apartment. Turns out, 3 years ago, when my startup first showed traction, Aunt Farah invested quietly. Not through me. She bought property. She told me later she didn't believe in startups. She believed in assets. When my company collapsed, she didn't tell me about the apartment. She waited. I needed to see something, she admitted. What? Whether you would become bitter. I felt heat rise in my chest. So this was a test? She shook her head.
No.
It was protection. If I had given it to you then, everyone would say you were rescued. I wanted you to stand, even when it hurt. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. So why now? She smiled. Because you thanked me for a $2 keychain like it was gold. There is one thing, she added carefully. Of course there was. I won't help you handle the family. I frowned. They will know eventually. And when they do, they'll treat you differently. I want to see how you respond. I understood then. This wasn't charity. This was empowerment. 3 months later, I invited the entire family to dinner. At my apartment. Melissa arrived first. She stepped inside and froze. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, city skyline glowing behind me. Her smile cracked.
Oh.
You're renting? I handed her the same keychain. She looked confused. It's cute, she said. It opens the front door. I replied calmly. Her face drained of color. The rest of the family arrived shortly after. My father kept asking how much the rent was. My mother whispered, "Is this safe? Can you afford it?" Melissa cornered me in the kitchen. Who's paying for this? No one. You expect me to believe you suddenly made $500,000? I leaned against the counter.
No.
But I expect you to believe paperwork. I showed her the deed. She scanned it twice. And then came the question I'd waited my entire life to hear.
How?
I smiled. Aunt Farah. Something fascinating happens when people realize they misjudged you. They try to rewrite history.
Suddenly.
We always knew you'd bounce back. You were just going through a phase. Melissa's tone softened overnight. She started calling me for investment advice. My parents bragged about me at gatherings, but I didn't feel vindicated. I felt observant, because I saw something else. Aunt Farah never told them she had owned 3 other properties. Never mentioned she'd funded Melissa's first down payment years ago, a fact I discovered later. The difference? Melissa had demanded help. I had never asked. Here's where it becomes revenge. Not screaming. Not humiliating. Strategic silence. When Melissa asked for help flipping a property, I declined politely. I'm focusing on stability. When my parents hinted about family pooling resources, I redirected. I think everyone should build independently. When extended relatives started inviting me to events they'd excluded me from before, I attended, calm, composed. Success without apology is the loudest statement. But the true twist came 6 months later. Melissa overleveraged herself on an investment. She assumed I would co-sign. She didn't even ask properly. She announced it at dinner. Since you have liquidity now, it makes sense you support the family. I set down my glass. I'm not responsible for rescuing people from their financial risks. Silence. The same silence I endured for years. She laughed nervously. You wouldn't let family fail. I met her gaze evenly. I wasn't family when I failed. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not explosive. But definitive. Later that night, Aunt Farah joined me on the balcony. You handled that well, she said. I wanted to scream. But you didn't. She looked proud. You see, the apartment wasn't the gift. What was? Leverage. She explained something I'll never forget. Money doesn't change people. It reveals negotiations that were always happening. My family's affection had always been conditional, performance-based. Now that I had value again, they recalibrated. But I didn't need their recalibration. I had my own foundation. A year later, Melissa downsized. My parents stopped comparing us. Relatives became neutral. And me? I rented out the apartment.
Yes.
I moved into a smaller place by choice. Because the greatest revenge wasn't living above them. It was proving I didn't need to. The rental income now funds my new business, one built slower, wiser. Aunt Farah calls it legacy planning. I call it peace. I thought the story was over. It wasn't. The apartment wasn't the climax. It was bait. And I didn't realize who the real target was until 6 months later, when Melissa tried to sue me. I was reviewing tenant contracts when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then an email notification. Subject: Notice of intent to pursue legal claim. My stomach dropped. Attached was a formal letter drafted by Melissa's lawyer. She was claiming that Aunt Farah had verbally promised her the next property investment and that my apartment had been improperly transferred. Improperly transferred. I read the line 5 times. It was absurd. The deed was airtight. But Melissa wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to intimidate, because she was drowning. Remember how she overleveraged? What I didn't know at the time was how bad it was. Melissa had taken out a second mortgage, a private investor loan, 2 high-interest business lines of credit, all tied to a renovation project that stalled when the contractor disappeared with funds. Irony is patient. Her solution? Create pressure. If she couldn't outperform me, she would destabilize me. I drove straight to Aunt Farah's house. She was watering her garden when I arrived. She's threatening legal action, I said. Aunt Farah didn't even blink. I know. My heart stopped. You knew. She turned off the hose calmly. I received a call yesterday. And I told her to proceed. That sentence hit harder than the lawsuit. You what? She needs to understand consequences. This could get messy. She gave me that same knowing smile for my birthday. It will. That night, Aunt Farah revealed something I never expected. The apartment wasn't just an asset. It was part of a trust. Structured, layered, protected. And Melissa? She had signed a clause years ago when accepting financial help for her first house. A clause stating she would have no claim to any other discretionary gifts or transfers. In simpler terms, she legally disqualified herself from ever challenging another beneficiary, including me. The lawsuit wouldn't just fail. It would expose her. Melissa didn't file the lawsuit immediately. Instead, she staged an intervention. Classic. She invited the whole family over to discuss fairness. I showed up. So did Aunt Farah. Melissa stood at the head of the table like she was presenting a business pitch. This family has always supported each other, she began. I nearly laughed. She projected printed bank statements on the TV. My apartment value. Estimated rental income. Property appreciation. You're sitting on nearly $500,000, she said sharply, while I'm carrying debt that was taken to expand family assets. Family assets. Interesting rebranding. Then she turned to Aunt Farah. You owe transparency. The room shifted. Everyone looked at Aunt Farah. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached into her purse and placed a folder on the table. I believe you signed this, she said gently. Melissa opened it. Her face drained slowly as she read. What is that? My father asked. A legal acknowledgement of prior assistance, Aunt Farah replied. Silence stretched like glass. You can't be serious, Melissa whispered. Oh, I am, Aunt Farah said calmly. You received $120,000 for your first property.
Non repayable.
Conditional. Melissa's hands started shaking. That was years ago. Yes, Aunt Farah said. And generosity is not a revolving credit line. The lawsuit never happened. It couldn't. But Melissa's image did. Relatives who once envied her now saw recklessness. Investors pulled back. And the family narrative flipped in a way I didn't expect.
Not toward me.
Away from her. That's the thing about power shifts. They don't crown a new favorite. They expose instability. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Aunt Farah's attorney. There was a meeting. Formal. Confidential. I assumed it was about the trust structure. It wasn't. It was about succession. Aunt Farah had no children. And she had decided something monumental. She wasn't distributing her properties evenly. She was creating a holding company. And she wanted me to run it. My throat went dry. That's enormous. Yes, she said softly. And terrifying. Which is why you're ready. I felt the weight immediately. This wasn't an apartment anymore. This was an empire. Later, I asked her something that had been burning in my chest. Why me? She looked out at the skyline. Because when you lost everything, you didn't turn cruel. I swallowed. You could have resented Melissa. You didn't. You built quietly. She paused. And because you thanked me for a $2 keychain. Just when I thought it was finished, she tried one last thing. She texted me at 1:12 a.m. I know about the company. You think you've won. I didn't respond. Another message. This isn't over.
But it was.
Because revenge had evolved. It wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about building something she could never access.
Stability. Control.
Vision. The holding company now manages 4 residential properties, 2 commercial leases, 1 development project underway. Melissa? She filed for structured debt restructuring. We're cordial.
Distant.
Neutral. The family no longer compares us. Because comparison requires competition. And I stopped competing. Last week, I visited Aunt Farah again. She handed me something small. Another velvet pouch. Inside, a second keychain. This one engraved with one word. No property attached. No documents. Just a reminder. The first keychain gave me a home. The second reminded me to become one. It's not loud. It's not explosive. It's controlled expansion while others implode. It's letting contracts speak where emotions once screamed. And sometimes, it starts with a $2 keychain. People think this story is about money, about a $400,000 apartment, about lawsuits and leverage, about who won. But that's not the truth. The truth is quieter. It's about what happens when you're underestimated long enough that you start underestimating yourself. It's about sitting in your childhood bedroom feeling like a cautionary tale, while someone, somewhere, is building a foundation beneath your feet. It's about realizing the smallest gift can carry the biggest shift. Melissa believed wealth was loud, that it demanded recognition, that it needed applause. Aunt Farah taught me something different. Real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It observes. It moves with paperwork instead of pride. I used to think revenge meant watching someone fall. Now I understand it means refusing to fall with them. I didn't destroy Melissa's life. I didn't humiliate her publicly. I didn't even celebrate when her plans collapsed. I just stopped being available for manipulation. And that changed everything. The apartment gave me security. The holding company gave me direction. But the real gift? Perspective. Because once you've been the disappointment, once you've felt the sting of comparison at every family dinner, once you've swallowed jokes disguised as concern, you stop chasing validation. You build insulation. And that's what this story was always about. Not inheritance. Not property. Not even revenge. It was about becoming untouchable in the calmest way possible. The keychain still hangs by my door.
Silver.
Slightly scratched now. 2 words live on my keys. And every time I lock the door behind me, I remember. The greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building something they can't control.